French President Emmanuel Macron presided over his last Bastille Day military parade here in Paris. This edition showcasing over 6,000 troops, including 500 from the coalition of the willing. France's rearmament and Europe's strategic autonomy were on full display this Tuesday. The event aims to show the US president and Russia's Vladimir Putin that Europe is united and stands ready to defend itself. For more on all of this, we can bring in Paul Smith, Associate Professor in French and Francophone Studies at the University of Nottingham. Thank you for joining us on the program today. What message do you think Emmanuel Macron was trying to send with his last Bastille Day parade?
Well, pretty much exactly as you said, Delano. This is France putting down a marker, Macron putting down a marker at his last Bastille Day parade. This is where we are now. I was kind of thinking about how his foreign policy traces, you can think of it sort of in a horizontal way, but also vertical, where we are now compared to where we were that first Bastille Day in 2017 and how much the geopolitical balance of the world has changed. Some would say not much, and others would say a great deal. And particularly with the way in which the second Trump presidency has shaped up, the way that Europe has had pressure put on it to reorganize itself, and not just Europe, but NATO, and other allies such as Canada and even Japan as well. So lots of different things going on at the same time. And it's kind of a signing off on the way things are developing. It's not the last thing that Macron's going to do, but a very important moment in actually what's a very important year in terms of international events.
That's true. We just had the G7. Last week we had NATO leaders meet in Ankara. Also, we had Europe that was on full display earlier today. We had, of course, Pedro Sanchez, who was in town, the EU Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen. This is obviously going to become part of Emmanuel Macron's legacy because he has been championing Europe throughout his presidency and calling on Europe to do more on its own.
Yes, absolutely, and you can see the results not just in France, of course, and it's a response to the Russian attacks on Ukraine, of course, and the relationship between Macron, his relationship with Zelensky. But we've seen the impact, particularly on Germany, for example, that from a very kind of laid-back approach to defence has suddenly started spending money in a very serious way. Its arms industry is gearing up in a very different way, almost unimaginable 5 years ago, and that's kind of been pushed by Macron. I think that he's been reactive in some ways, and some would say not quickly enough, but also he's been very instrumental in pushing things forward.
Yesterday, we had the French president who spoke to the French armed forces. And the tone of his speech was quite interesting. He reiterated what he said last year, that in order to be free, you need to be feared. But he added that to win the wars of tomorrow, you need to win the wars of today by essentially showcasing the coalition of the willing at today's Bastille Day parade. He's trying to tell the world that Ukraine is fighting Europe's fight.
Yes, absolutely. And there's a great deal of very serious reflection going on in France and in other countries about the risk of a very serious another European war between now and 2030. The Germans are certainly taking that risk very seriously. And that the conflict in Ukraine is only the beginning of, and that conflict would be between Russia and Europe, possibly over the Kaliningrad enclave. Nobody knows exactly where, but there's certainly a great deal of intelligence that's pointing in that direction. And so what we're doing now would be Macron's approach. What we're doing now is preparing us, getting us ready for 2030, and a lot of defense planning and strategic planning, of course, is getting stuff in place by 2035. So the big question is, will enough of that strategic planning be in place by 2030 from the European perspective, at least?
We have just under 9 months, 10 months until the next presidential election. A lot can happen between now and then, we know. But if the polls were to be believed, the far right is due to come out on top. Even in the second round. Would the far right share the same threat assessment that the current president does?
It's very difficult to get to second guess this one. Marine Le Pen, of course, has always been quite critical of Macron and has always, in 2022, for example, when the Russians invaded Ukraine, there was all the second Russian invasion of Ukrainian territory. She was very much taken aback because she's always been pro-Russian or at least sympathetic towards the Russian position. And there's a lot of sentiment on the far right in France, not just Le Pen, but people like the Vincent Bolloré press, which has been very pro-Kremlin, that things might shift. So I think that what Macron wants to try to do is to, first of all, is to lock France into that. It's very interesting to look at the situation in Italy, where one might have imagined that Giorgia Meloni's Italy might take a very different position, but actually hasn't. It's been a much more committed member of NATO and a member of the coalition of the willing, and its relationship with Ukraine has become very close. So it's not easy to second guess what would happen when or if the extreme right comes to power in France. And certainly the forward planning is there. So one can imagine that Le Pen might find herself having to row back from a lot of the more conciliatory rhetoric, because it may be that Putin is not particularly conciliatory himself, because, of course, that kind of diplomatic dance needs two partners.
We'll see how things shape up. We're going to have to leave it there. Paul Smith joining us there from Nottingham today.